This is music, and this is a bunch of sophomore albums, better than, or at least as good as, the debut albums. Analog Archives has reached 2,000 subs, and that's awesome. Do check out that channel. It's a vinyl community channel. He shows a lot of old school metal, but basically talks about a lot of different genres as well. And he does mostly more long form videos and goes in depth with the things he's talking about. So that's kind of refreshing. So go and check out his channel. But he's reached 2,000 subs and is throwing a fun contest. The principle behind the contest is very simple. Show 10 sophomore albums that are better than or at least as good as the debut albums. Now, this is, of course, a topic that will step on a lot of people's toes because nowadays people just can't handle it with somebody disagrees with their tastes in music. So I will probably step on a bunch of toes. If you have a problem with that, if it makes you angry, just grow up, basically. Anyways, this is my entry into the contest, and I have adapted it a little bit. So instead of conceptualizing it as albums that are better than or at least as good as the debut album, I've gone with sophomore albums that I just like better for whatever reason than the debut album, because music is a very subjective thing, and I don't really know what the criteria would be for objectively saying that one album is better than another album. So these are 10 sophomore albums that I like better or at least as much as the debut albums. So let's get down to business. Up first, Never Neverland by Annihilator. The debut album is fantastic. Never Neverland is also fantastic in my opinion. But Never Neverland was the first Annihilator album I ever heard. Somebody made a dub tape with this album on it for me. And I was just blown away by basically everything about it. So that's probably why I like it a tad better than the debut album. But they're both fantastic albums in my opinion. Up next, ARG, One World Without the End. Thrash metal, maybe bordering on death thrash. The debut album is solid, but I think that they have maybe matured a bit as musicians on this album. So there's just more of an overall punch to it. And out of the two albums, when I feel like listening to ARG, this is typically the one I reach for. So I like both of them, the albums, but I prefer this one. Okay. Up next, maybe it's a bit of a low-hanging fruit, but New Beginning by Bandmate. Their first album was a completely different style, and it was more pop-punk-ish music on the first album. And I do like the first album. It's a fun listen, but here, this is where they start doing their hard rock style, and basically both on the first album, or mini album really, and this mini album, they had external writers writing music for them because they were not allowed to use their own material by management. More or less, that's the story condensed. But I think on the first album, the songwriters just didn't know what to do with this band. They didn't know what kind of music to write for them, and by this album they had kind of figured that out. There's a bunch of Bandmate fans that don't like this album or the debut album or the following one because they had external songwriters, but I think this is a great melodic hard rock album with lots of songs on that are just great, melodic, uplifting, catchy, memorable songs. So this one I think is much better, like in my opinion, much better than the debut album. But the debut album is good fun, to be sure. Okay, up next, we have Realm of Chaos by Bolt Thrower with the kind of reissue cover artwork. I don't have the one with the blue Space Marines because it's expensive as hell. So I think this is just a case of the band maturing as artists compared to the debut album, In Battle There's No Law. The debut album and this one, they are still kind of rough around the edges. The drumming is a little bit sloppy. Both of these have more kind of grindcore elements than the style they're really known for. I just think that this one here is, they've just progressed a little bit more as musicians, and that you can, or I think I can detect that on here. So Realm of Chaos, I like In Battle There's No Law a lot, but my favorite Bolt Thrower stuff, that's the stuff that comes after War Master, actually. And my favorite Bolt Thrower album is Those Ones Loyal, which is their last album as far as I remember. Anyways, up next, here, Symphonies of Sickness by Carcass. Yeah, I know it's the censored cover here. I do have the uncensored cover on CD, but actually I kind of like what they did with this censored cover. They made it kind of arty in a way. Anyways, so this might be a low-hanging fruit too. The first album, Reek of Putrefaction, was an all-out grindcore album, and the music is actually pretty cool on that album, but the production is what drags the debut album down. Now I know that there are some people out there that basically only like the first album because it is so raw and grindy and undergroundy in the production, but this one I think has a much more professional sounding production. There's a bit more variation in the music. This is more like death metal with grindcore in it. So I much prefer this one to the debut album. The debut album is a fun listen, again, don't get me wrong. And this is a similar story to Bolt Thrower. My favorite Carcass stuff is actually what they release after this one. My favorite Carcass album is Necroticism, and I quite like Hard Work too. I know that's also blasphemy, but I don't care. And I like Swan Song. That might be even more blasphemous, but again, you like what you like. Up next, DAD Draws a Circle. The debut album, I quite enjoy the debut album too, and there's some really good songs in the debut album, but this is more of a punk rock, hard rock, classic rock album, while the debut album is cowpunk, basically a mix of country, western, and punk music. And it's a very enjoyable album, and I really like the debut album, but I think this one is more up my alley style-wise, with the hard rock stuff and the punk rock stuff as well. But again, similar story. My favorite stuff by this band, that's what they did after this one. So No Fuel Left for the Pilgrims and Risking It All and Help You're Selfish are my favorite DAD or Disneyland After Dark albums. Okay, up next, this might be blasphemy to a lot of people. Death Leprosy. Scream Bloody Gore it's a classic. It's a very important album in the history of metal, and it has some great songs on it for sure. But to me, Death Schuldiner, basically, this is where the artistic side, the musicianship, all that stuff kind of matures. So that's why I think this one is better, or I like this one better than the debut album. There's some great songs on here too. It's a death metal classic. And again, very similar story. While I love the 3 first Death albums, my favorite stuff is actually from Human and onwards. So I know blasphemy, but I think this one, I like it better than the debut album, and I still love the debut album. I know, hard to believe. Up next, The Spectre Within by Fate's Warning. Night on Brecon is a great traditional heavy metal album, but this is where, although people say it's on No Exit that they become a progressive metal band, to me, the progressive elements already kind of make their way into Fate's Warning style on this album, and they sound like they've matured a lot as a band on this album compared to the debut. There's some fantastic vocal lines on here, and overall, I just think it's the next step. It's in the progression of a band becoming more and more proficient and maturing. So I think it kind of makes sense that I would like this one better than the debut album. My favorite Fate's Warning album with John Arch on vocals, that's the next one. And my favorite Fate's Warning album, altogether, that's Inside Out, which is a very, very different style. Okay, up next, here, Invocator, Weave the Apocalypse. The debut album, Excursion Demise, is a super fast, aggressive thrash metal album. Some people have called it death thrash. I don't know if I agree, but it certainly is fast, aggressive, and kind of extreme, and also technical. This album here is darker, it's slower, it's heavier, it's more like mid-paced thrash metal. It's even more technical, and it's also progressive. And I really like the lead guitar work by Perle, who plays the lead guitar on this one and the following album. It's very melodic lead guitar stuff, and it's very interesting. And I love Excursion Demise. I love this album. I love Dying to Live, which came after this album. I just like this one a little bit more than Excursion Demise. So there you go. And up last, probably Blasphemy 2, but I think Metallica's Ride the Lightning is better than Kill 'Em All. And it's Blasphemy because there are a lot of old-timey Metallica fans to whom Kill 'Em All is the only good Metallica album, and they would argue that they stopped playing thrash metal on this album. And I've always wondered, what the hell are you talking about? You got Fight Fire with Fire. That's as thrashy as anything can be. But I think it's because you have a ballad on here, and you have For Whom the Bell Tolls, which is kind of a slower song. But I love Kill 'Em All. But similar story to a lot of the others I've shown, they've matured a bit as musicians on here. I think the production is much better on here too. I think the songs are better, composed, and James Hetfield sounds like he's 17 years on this one, while on Kill 'Em All he sounds like he's 14 years old. So there you go. So yeah, I like Ride the Lightning better than I like Kill 'Em All, but I think Kill 'Em All is obviously a very important album in the history of metal. It's also an album that I love. I just love this one a little bit more. And surprise, surprise, I actually like Master of Puppets and Justice for All even better. So those are my two favorite Metallica albums. So there you go, 10 albums, sophomore albums that I like better, or at least as much as the debut albums. I know I probably stepped on a whole lot of toes here, but instead of crying about it, why don't you make your own video and enter into Analog Archives contest? At the very least, go and check out his channel because it's great, and I think everybody needs some long form videos every now and then to help us expand our attention spans just a little bit. So there you go. Thanks for watching.